once you sign that form, nothing is really easy and it's not at all guaranteed. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. A year or two, I don't remember exactly when, but I'll post to the video at the end of this video. I made a video about petitioning for your parents and what the process looks like if you, a US citizen, wants to bring your immigrant parent over to the US, or if your parent is already in the US, how to fix their status so that they can become a permanent resident, a green card holder. That video got a lot of comments. A lot of people really liked the topic and had a ton of questions. So I thought I would kind of repeat the video, add some stuff, and if you have any follow-up questions, you can put them in the comments below. There are two scenarios that we're going to be discussing today where you can fix your parents' immigration status by petitioning for them. The first one we're going to discuss is if your parent is abroad outside of the US and has no way to legally enter the US. So the important thing here is that your parents have no lawful way, no legal way to enter the US. They have no access to a visa or visa waiver program. They're not from a country that allows them to waive the visa requirements so they can enter the US with something called ESTA. In that situation, you have to file a family petition for them. The process starts by filing Form I-130, Petition for Alien Relative. You have to wait for the petition to get approved. That could easily take anywhere from like 6 to 18 months currently. After it gets approved, the case will get transferred to the National Visa Center. You'll receive an email with your case login info. It'll have a case ID number and an invoice ID number in the email. You use that login info to log into the National Visa Center's website, where we have to submit a lot more documentation. We need to submit an affidavit of support, their birth certificate, police clearance records showing they have no criminal history, and we also need to fill out a DS-260. It's an application for an immigrant visa. After everything has been submitted to the National Visa Center, we will receive a notification saying the case has been documentarily qualified. That means the National Visa Center is satisfied with what you've submitted and they're passing the case along to the consulate. Eventually, the consulate will email your parents with instructions for them to schedule a medical examination and an interview. And if all goes well at the interview, they will receive an immigrant visa in their passport, which they can use to enter the US within 6 months. Once they use that visa to enter, the day they enter, they become a permanent resident. They have to pay another $220 immigrant visa fee, and the green card will arrive in their house, their mailing address, probably like 4 months later, could be a little longer than that. So that's the general process if your parents are outside of the US, and it's a little different from when your parents are inside the US. Let's say your parents are in the US and they initially entered legally. Whether they are out of status right now is less relevant. They could have entered as a tourist and overstayed. Now they're here and they entered legally. And you, their son or daughter, are over the age of 21 and you are a US citizen. So under these circumstances, we can usually fix their status in one shot. It's called a one-step application for adjustment of status. The reason it's called one step is because we can submit all of the paperwork at once. We don't need to wait for the family petition, the I-130, to get approved first before we apply for their green card or employment authorization. What we will do in this situation is file the family petition, the green card application, employment authorization application, application for advanced parole, and affidavit of support. We'll file all these forms at once. A few months later, your parent should receive their employment authorization card and social security number. And probably within a year of that, typically, they should just receive their green card in the mail. They'll receive an approval notice followed by the green card. Typically, when you're petitioning for a parent, there is no immigration interview, but that's not always the case, especially if the parent is a father. The chances of having an immigration interview are a little increased when the parent is a father, especially if the child was born outside of wedlock. There might be additional evidence you need to prove that the father was actually involved in the child's life, whereas a mother is presumed to have been involved in the child's life. So these are the two general ways that you can petition for your parents. Now, something I would like to explain that comes up a lot is when your parent becomes a permanent resident, they must actually intend to permanently live in the US. A lot of older people will get a green card, permanent resident card, and they'll kind of use it as a glorified tourist visa where they'll spend like 6 months in the US each year, then they'll leave the US for 6 months, and then they'll come back for 6 months. You can do that, but eventually there's a chance that the customs officer, when you're trying to enter the US, will pull you to the side and interrogate you about what your intent is. They want to see that you intend to permanently live in the US and you don't maintain your real residence abroad and you're just using it to visit the US for 6 months at a time. They can ask you questions like, where's your permanent mailing address? Where are you working? Do you have health insurance, car insurance? Do you have any US bank accounts? They're trying to see what your connections and ties are to the US. And if your response is something like, I don't have a lease in the US, I just come and I stay with friends and family. I work abroad, I don't work in the US. I don't have any permanent mailing address in the US. And you've been leaving very regularly for large periods of time, like half the year. There's a chance that the officer can determine that you are not permanently residing in the US, and they can begin a procedure to basically take away your permanent residence. I've discussed this in other videos, so I don't want to get too much into it, but what they can do is try to pressure you to sign a form. It's called I-407, Abandonment of Permanent Residence, where they try to get you to voluntarily abandon your permanent residence. And sometimes they'll even say things like, yeah, signing this will go a long way when you apply for your tourist visa. You should be able to easily get that tourist visa so you can keep coming to the US. But in reality, once you sign that form, nothing is really easy. And it's not at all guaranteed that you'll be able to get a tourist visa in the future. So never sign that form unless you speak to an immigration lawyer. The only other way you could really lose your permanent residence is if an immigration judge signs a deportation order. So even if you've been out of the US for years with your green card and you assume that you've abandoned your green card, that might not necessarily be true. I've made a bunch of videos on what the abandonment considerations are, so be sure to check those out if you're in that situation. One other consideration I just want to mention. I've made a couple videos on this, and I actually recently released one where the parent who you're trying to petition for entered the US illegally. So in that situation, we need to fix their illegal entry. And I've discussed this in the other videos. There could be a couple options. If they've entered before 2001, they might be eligible for something called 245I. If they have any children or family members in the military, we might be able to fix their status without them ever leaving. It's called military parole in place. If they have TPS or DACA, we might be able to apply for parole to allow them to leave the US temporarily and re-enter legally. Or if they entered through the border, like by sitting in a car and they just got waved through even though they didn't have a visa, they might meet the inspection requirements and still be eligible for permanent residence. The final thing I want to talk about it, and the reason I want to talk about it is because I get a lot of questions, is the child who's petitioning for the parent. There are two main requirements. One, they must be over the age of 21. 18 is not enough. The child who's petitioning for the parent must be over the age of 21. And they must be a US citizen. They cannot be a permanent resident. There is no immigration category for permanent residents who are petitioning for parents. So those are the two main requirements. The final thing I want to touch on before I end this video is your parent or somebody in this situation might have a legal way to enter the US, and they might be wondering whether they should enter the US and do adjustment of status in the US, or if they should do this whole process through the consulate abroad. There are many situations where both options might be available to you. And to figure out what's best for you and your family, it's a good idea to speak with an immigration lawyer, even if your plan is to file the paperwork yourself. I do consultations where people ask me what the best option is. And they tell me up front that they're planning on filing all the paperwork themselves, and I'm happy to use the 1 hour consultation time that they paid for to advise them on the best way to file the paperwork, the best strategy, the best procedure, so that they have the highest chance of success in their case. If you're applying for any immigration benefits and you need some assistance or guidance, or you want to at least talk to a lawyer before you file it yourself to create a plan, please schedule a consultation with me. I would be more than happy to spend the entire hour teaching you the best way to do it yourself. Or of course, if you don't want to deal with the headache and you want to hire me to do the whole thing for you, that's what we do all day and night. Alright guys, that brings us to the end of today's video. If you have any specific questions about filing a petition for a family member, please put it in the comments below. I'll answer all the questions within 1 week of a video posting. If you're interested in these topics or want to see more videos like this, stay tuned because I post them on a weekly basis.